Hi everyone, this is Mark Buckles for New Mexico State University Carlsbad. This VoiceThread PowerPoint lecture presents the essentials of nonverbal communication as established by recent research. Among the goals for Learning Module 3, we'll learn about the functions nonverbal communication serves and how nonverbal communication interacts with verbal messages, and we'll begin to learn to encode and decode nonverbal messages more effectively. Nonverbal communication has a number of functions. When we communicate nonverbally, we integrate nonverbal messages with verbal ones. We form and manage messages, structure conversations, express emotions, define relationships, and of course, influence and deceive. As we send verbal messages, we use nonverbal communication to accent and emphasize, to complement and add nuances, to contradict, regulate, repeat, and even substitute messages. Let's consider the channels of nonverbal communication available to us. Of course, we use the entire body itself to communicate, and quite commonly our hands. We send and receive messages with the face and the eyes and through touch. The artifacts with which we surround ourselves or manipulate send messages. We use voices to send messages apart from words when we use paralanguage. Finally, we use silence and time to communicate. Even smell sends messages. First, let's consider body communication. Body movement, kinesics, can be broken down into 5 types. Our bodies, especially our hands, often function as emblems. Emblems have very specific meanings and function the way the 60s peace sign stood for generational solidarity, or the way in which during the London Blitz in 1940, the same sign stood for victory and resolve. Illustrators are less specific than emblems and employ the body to extend meanings in the moment according to personality and topic. As we narrate an experience, we might illustrate being given the cold shoulder by someone, and then reinforce the concept with body movement. An affect display may rise abruptly out of deep and almost uncontrollable emotion. We regulate both conversations and the behaviors of others with our bodies and our gestures, just as a teacher might slow a child from running in the halls, or a traffic cop might regulate traffic with the entire body. Finally, we adapt our body movements to particular needs. That is, when we scratch, I suppose we communicate that we itch. Finally, the appearance of our body communicates things about ourselves, what we think is important, attractive, or what we value, and of course, our health. Facial management is a powerful channel of nonverbal communication. We intensify our expressions to communicate meanings, or manage our responses and the messages we communicate by de-intensifying and even neutralizing facial expressions. In fact, we can mask ourselves entirely with our faces and act, even simulate emotions and responses for purposes as varied as entertaining or dissembling. Research shows us that in regard to facial management technique, women are better than men at encoding and decoding accurately, and that in our culture, emotions such as happiness or surprise are easier to encode and decode than others. Let's consider eye communication, another powerful channel of communication. We open communication with our eyes and seek feedback. We use the eyes to close physical distance and establish psychological intimacy. We use them to signal the nature of our relationship with another. Eye contact can be used to establish dominance. Their signaling power controls conversation and influences behavior. When we avoid eye contact, perhaps we do so out of respect or apathy or horror or incivility. We know that the other senses may be enhanced by limiting the function of one. Let's consider the meanings assigned commonly to the ways North Americans address space, proxemics. Research establishes 4 spatial areas, each with its own meaning and messages. If you look closely at the illustration, you can imagine what these messages might communicate. Our intimate relationships are reserved for a space 0 to 18 inches away from the other. Ideally, this space is reserved for our significant others, for our children and family members. A person needs to be invited into this space. To invade this protective bubble without invitation is to run the risk of threatening or insulting. We even use the expression today of a person being in our face to describe this violation of space. Next, apart from intimate moments, our personal relations are conducted at spaces between 1 and 4 feet in distance, and our social relations are conducted at distances even farther apart, say at 4 to 12 feet. As we walk on the street, enter shops, conduct business, we seek to establish this space. That said, of course, the context of communication will influence these distances. Finally, a public relationship is defined by a distance of 12 to 25 feet. This is the distance a speechmaker should stand from her audience in public speaking. Consequently, we see that territories we occupy can be defined as primary, secondary, and public territories. Let's discuss how we might communicate and even establish these territories artifactually, that is, with artifacts, objects. Central markers are items you place in a territory to reserve it. Say books to mark your place at a table in the library. Boundary markers divide territory. We have only to look at our maps for an illustration of these, or to set the baton down between our groceries and someone else's when we're in line at the supermarket. Finally, ear markers indicate ownership of a territory or property. Stock raisers have branded their cattle from time immemorial. In addition to territorial markers, artifactual communication takes the form of color communication, clothing and body adornment, and space decoration. Obviously, our selections made in regard to all these things send messages and make disclosures regarding personality, experience, and values. Touch is a powerful channel of nonverbal communication. So powerful, in fact, the world's great religions have often accorded it a kind of sacramental significance. We touch others to communicate positive feelings, to play and to control behavior. We use touch in our rituals and in our jobs and professions. Touch avoidance, on the other hand, is something we need to pay special attention to in regard to culture and gender preference. Our voices communicate with paralanguage. Among its various elements, our pitch, speech rate, and volume communicate messages integral to or apart from the words we speak. Oftentimes, our judgments concerning people and communication effectiveness are directly linked to the messages conveyed through paralanguage. Silence is a channel of nonverbal communication as well. It gives us time to think, and we can use it as a weapon to hurt. In certain contexts, silence lessens anxiety or prevents a certain message from being communicated. Certainly, silence can be a channel of emotional communication. Now let's consider how we use time to communicate. As with all channels of communication, the ways in which we use time can either confirm or disconfirm other people, their concerns and activities. Chronemics refers to how we treat time and use it to communicate. Certainly, we've all known people who are chronically late and puzzled over the messages conveyed by that lateness. We're told that one individual more than another may be psychically conditioned to emphasize the past or the present, or the future, assigning one or the other a particular inflection in his or her experience. Research that tends to support that time orientation depends largely on one's socio-economic class and personal experience. Let's consider cultural time now. We know that people in different cultures view time differently. In some, immediate gratification takes too long, while others are described as living in Tomorrowland. It's important to realize all cultures relate to three clocks. The social clock is the unspoken timetable that tells one if she or he is keeping pace with peers or is falling behind. Formal time refers to the seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years a culture experiences. We're told the Japanese have the most accurate clocks in the world, and that the social life of the Japanese reflects that precision. Finally, cultures have their own senses of informal time. Expressions like forever, immediately, or ASAP have different meanings in different cultures. A culture's orientation toward time might be either monochronic or polychronic. The United States, Scandinavia, and Germany are identified as countries with monochronic orientations to time. In these countries, time tends to be compartmentalized, with one thing scheduled at a time. On the other hand, Latin Americans, Mediterraneans, and Arab peoples are identified as areas of the world with polychronic orientations to time. These cultures tend to schedule more than one thing at the same time. We know that nonverbal communication differs from culture to culture. The meanings of colors vary greatly, and that touch functions are not served in the same ways. Finally, all cultures do not view silence the same. Individualist cultures often view silence negatively, while to a more collectivist culture, silence may simply betoken modesty, respect, and reflection. Finally, as channels of nonverbal communication, body movement, facial management technique, and eye contact differ from culture to culture. Take some time to look over our text and the screen before you and reflect on the differences in meaning of the same body movements, in this case, hand gestures. That concludes Learning Module 3's PowerPoint lecture on some essential aspects of nonverbal communication.